Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Seinfeld, and I'm the political director for the California Democratic Party. And I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to CADEM Celebrates Passover as a Call to Justice. This is the second CADEM Celebrate event that I've been able to participate in after last year's Social Justice Shabbat. And as a Jew and a Democrat, it has been really great that the California Democratic Party has created this opportunity for us to talk about how the values we learn as a Jew, and then additionally what we're fighting for as a member of the Democratic Party are so closely aligned. And so we're going to hear from a number of great speakers tonight, elected officials and activists in the Jewish community and internationally. And so with that, without further ado, let me introduce California State Controller and California Democratic Party Vice Chair, Betty.
Thank you, Ben, very much. And hello, everyone. As CADEM Celebrates recognizes the rich traditions of our diverse communities in California, I'm mindful of Passover as an observance that is both religious and cultural for the Jewish community. And as such, the Jewish story of the Exodus contains many themes that speak to us universally about the oppression experienced beyond the Israelites and the Jewish community, adversity, enslavement, anti-Semitism, and more. However, the story of the Exodus also contains themes of hope and triumph and resilience. And the reading of the Haggadah, which means telling, during the Passover Seder is more than a ritual. It keeps the Exodus story alive through the generations, and more significantly, has our relating to today's experiences of oppression around us. And so as CADEM Celebrates, recognizes Passover, we renew our commitment to uplift all communities. And just as the Haggadah sets forth the order of the Seder ritual with the telling of the Exodus story, may equity and justice always be in order to ground the work of the California Democratic Party. Hag Sameach.
Thank you, Betty. Next, please join me in welcoming Rabbi Denise Eger and Rabbi Stephen Jacobs, who will lead us in the Passover prayers.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so honored to be here with all of you as we celebrate this holiday together. Passover is, as we know, our festival of spring and the festival of freedom. Now, we celebrate the liberation of the ancient Israelites from slavery in Egypt, rescued by the hand of God, with a special ritual meal that I hope many of you had a chance to participate in. It's called the Seder, which means order in Hebrew. For millennia, Jews have retold the story of the Exodus from Egypt with symbolic foods and stories, rituals, and songs from the special book called the Haggadah. The Seder is a sacred meal that continues to have contemporary applications. Jewish tradition teaches that in every generation, each person is to imagine that they are the ones to have left Egypt. This brings an opportunity to add creativity and interpretations to our Seder rituals. We put together this supplement of additional and special readings for the Seder ritual, and we offer them as a way to enhance our celebration of Passover while bringing our Jewish and democratic values to the fore. While this tonight is not a hug, a festival, we are going to light candles because they are a reminder for us. So as I light these candles tonight, we celebrate this festival of freedom, Zman Cherutenu in Hebrew. And if we can move the supplement forward a couple of pages to page 3 of the supplement. One more. Our hearts turn to our family and friends, our fellow Democrats in love. We celebrate tonight with gratitude and thanksgiving for the many blessings bestowed upon us. The flames we now light are ever a reminder that democracy and liberty are not just simply taken for granted, but like striking a match that erupts in a flame or flickering a lighter, the sparks that ignite can bring warmth and light. The sparks can shine fully when we work to create a society where all have a place at the table. On this night, we are inspired by the journey of our ancestors to freedom, and we are taught in every generation a person should see themselves as if they went forth from Egypt. Tonight, we leave behind the narrow place of enmity and oppression. So let us walk together into the broad expanse of liberty and opportunity for all people, creating a world together of hope, fairness, equity, and equality. Rabbi Jacobs?
Good evening. What an amazing evening. Tonight, the synagogue, the Jewish community has no walls as we welcome each other, certainly around the state and beyond. I want to thank Betty for the wonderful introduction and my dear friend of decades, Rabbi Denise Egger. A painting, a favorite of mine, shows a rabbi sitting in a chair leaning down to tie his shoelaces. His student sits by his side and is asked, "What did you learn from your rabbi?" And the student humbly said, "I watched how he tied his shoes." We learn much from this response, from one another, how we treat ourselves and how we treat others. And when the Israelites left Egypt, their feet carried them onto the road to freedom. When Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel joined Martin Luther King on his march from Selma to Montgomery, his critics were many. He answered them by saying, "I was praying with my feet." He was marching with Martin Luther King. As we are celebrating this great festival of freedom, Passover, we've always been called to action by protesting with our feet. We in our party have always, since Egypt, marched with Moses to a very different tune. We march for freedom with our feet. We're now marching on state houses, demanding for the right to vote. We march against racism, and we march for economic equity, and so much more. Can we do less in this critical moment in history, as has the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, when he said on his feet, facing the world, Hineni, here I am not leaving. Hineni, here I am. Friends, here we are at this critical moment in history. May none of us turn away. May we, like Moses and President Zelensky, say, Hineni, here I am, here we are, and I lift this cup of Elijah for the hope that there is redemption and freedom and that people will live. L'chaim, Chag Sameach.
Thank you, dear Rabbi. As we know, we pour out 10 drops of wine or juice to commemorate the 10 plagues that God visited upon Egypt when Pharaoh refused to free the Israelites. Each plague intensified in severity as the Pharaoh became more intransigent in his position. The 10 plagues remind us that Pharaoh could have changed his mind. He had free will to embrace freedom and liberty and chose instead authoritarianism. As we know, there are still pharaohs in our midst today, and the forces of authoritarianism and fascism must be challenged and democracy upheld, whether at home or abroad. So, if you'll join me in the 10 traditional plagues: Dam, blood; Tzfardea, frogs; Kinim, bugs; Arov, wild animals; Dever, pestilence; Shechin, boils; Barad, hail; Arbe, lochus; Choshech, darkness; Makat Becharot was the death of the firstborn. In many communities and in many of your homes, perhaps like mine, we consider and pour out drops of wine or juice to talk about those things which plague our society in our day. Things we might consider are systemic racism, climate change, voter suppression, lack of access to health care, economic inequality, demonizing LGBTQ people and trans youth, the rise in anti-Semitism and hate against the AAPI communities, the attack on Roe v. Wade and reproductive freedom, gun violence, homelessness, poverty, our ongoing coronavirus pandemic. But tonight, in our democratic values, as we express them together, we might consider pouring back in to the cup the fullness of things we pray for, things we hope for, things that we Democrats want to work for. So as I add drops back into the cup, let our cup run over with goodness and with commitment to changing the world and bringing about the world that we Democrats want to see. Closing the gender gap in wages, protecting the right to choose, creating national standards on use of force, ensuring that corporations pay their fair share of taxes, protecting voting rights, end for-profit detention, tackle income inequality, bring U.S. greenhouse gas emissions down, transform the asylum and refugee and immigration system as it now stands, and advance a two-state solution that provides peace, security, and opportunity for Israelis and Palestinians. As we conclude this portion of our program today, we want to make another particular prayer because of the amount of refugees that we're seeing around the world. So if you can see the screen, and we invite you to join us and in the all portions of this particular prayer. We are seeing unprecedented numbers of refugees in the world. They flee from war and famine. They flee from violence and plague, economic collapse, human trafficking, and climate change. More than 82.4 million people are displaced worldwide. The current situation in Ukraine has displaced more than 10 million people in only several weeks. We are watching it unfold in painful ways before our eyes. And there are Afghan and Yemeni refugees, there are Syrian and Venezuelan refugees, Guatemalan and Honduran and Haitian refugees awaiting entrance to a promised land. There are people from Myanmar and South Sudan who are refugees. There are more people than there are refugees and asylum seekers than at any time since World War II. As we observe this holiday of Passover that marks the exodus from Egypt, we recall that the Israelites fled oppression and slavery. They too were refugees, walking mile after mile to seek a promised land. Today, refugees walk on foot and come in trains and boats and planes, seeking a promised land, a place of safety for themselves and their families in numerous countries around the world. On this holiday of Passover, we are reminded to let all who are hungry come and eat at our table. May we welcome the stranger and the refugee into our country and our home. On this holiday of Passover, let us open the doors not only for Elijah, but for the refugee and asylum seekers. May God's outstretched arm, the Zeroah Netuyah, reach out toward the refugee and bring them safely to a land of peace and of hope. And together, let us all say, Amen.
Thank you so much, rabbis, for that beautiful, beautiful observance and reflection on Passover and everything that the holiday means. It is such an honor to be with you, Rabbi Eager, and with you, Rabbi Jacobs. My name is Jesse Gabriel. I have the great privilege of representing the West San Fernando Valley, the 45th Assembly District in the California State Assembly. And I see that we have some great activists from the San Fernando Valley who are joining us this evening. I also have the great privilege of being chair of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus. So it's a special, it's really special for me to be here this evening. And I want to say it is such an honor to be with our amazing, amazing CADEM vice chair and statewide elected official, Betty Yee, to be with so many wonderful leaders who are doing such change-making work in our community, and also with so many activists from across the state. I was watching the chat and I see that we have activists up and down the state of California. So it's really an honor to be here with all of you. I'm going to take us into the next part of our program, which is going to be a moderated conversation with some wonderful activists and change makers who are doing so much good work in our community. But I just want to take a moment to set the stage. As many of you know, Passover is an important religious holiday for the Jewish community, but is also a holiday with really universal themes that remind us of our values and that connect so well to the values that we hold dear as Democrats. And one of the things that I always think about during Passover is that the spirit of this holiday is really meant to inculcate within all of us empathy. We remind ourselves, we imagine ourselves as slaves in the land of Egypt, the lowest of the low, people without freedom or rights or opportunity, without dignity. And then we, in that period, are transformed to think about all of those around us who are not free, all of those around us, whether they are immigrants or people who are lacking resources, people facing racism or oppression or inequity. We can have a deeper empathy for them and a deeper understanding of our obligations to work to lift them up. And that is very, very central to our mission as a Jewish caucus in the state legislature, all 18 of us, as we work together to advance progressive values and our democratic values in the state legislature. And that is very central to the work that we all do as democratic activists gathered here today. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in some of these fantastic leaders. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of the issues facing us today and how our Jewish values inform the approach to overcoming them. And I won't take the time to read their bios, but because they're so impressive, but I will give you just a little taste of the impressive folks that we have with us today. So first, I want to welcome and introduce Tyler Gregory. He serves as the CEO of the San Francisco-based Jewish Community Relations Council, JCRC, which is the Bay Area's leading public affairs organization. JCRC has mobilized Jewish communities and our neighbors and allies to combat anti-Semitism, anti-Asian, and anti-Black racism. And under Ty's leadership, JCRC has also become a leading Jewish voice on ensuring fair and inclusive ethnic studies in California schools. So Tyler, it's so good to see you. We're so grateful for all the amazing work that you do in the Bay Area and beyond. What I wanted to ask you is, we know that intersectionality features very, very heavily into your work at JCRC, probably more than many would assume. So can you share a project that you're excited about that you and your team are working on now?
Thanks, Assemblymember, and Chag Sameach, everybody. And Assemblymember, it's nice to have you be the moderator for once. So thanks for having me. So we've said throughout the Seder several times, here I am, Hineni. And at the beginning of the pandemic, as we saw rising hate against Asian communities and Jewish communities and others, we decided that we needed to flip the script and that our community was focusing heavily on combating anti-Semitism, combating Jewish hatred. But what we felt was missing was a positive message, the same positive message that the LGBTQ community and the It Gets Better project says, it gets better, Black Lives Matter. We need a positive message. And so we started recording videos from diverse Jewish community leaders, including many of your colleagues up here in Northern California, Assembly member, to talk about their lived experiences with anti-Semitism, but their pride in being Jewish in the Bay Area. And importantly, we have one of the most diverse Jewish communities in the country. 1 out of 6 Jews, or 1 out of 7 Jews in the Bay Area identifies as a Jew of color. And so it was important to us to highlight elected officials and civic leaders of Asian descent, African-American descent, Latino descent, to talk about their Jewishness. We frame a lot of these issues of racial justice as allyship, but that binary just doesn't make sense. The reality is anti-Semitism is an issue of direct concern to communities of color because there are Jews in those communities. And the inverse is true. When our community is standing up for racial justice, we don't only do it in allyship. We do it because members of our own community demand it of us. And as a gay Jew myself, I demand that the Jewish community also stand up for LGBTQ equality, not only as allyship, but because I, as a member of the Jewish community, demand it. And so I'm so proud to have a strong Jewish Legislative Caucus with you and your Vice Chair, Scott Wiener, who are standing up against this anti-trans wave of hate. So we're all in this together. It's not only about the binary of allyship, it's about all of us coming together as one collective community fighting for justice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ty. We are so grateful for the leadership that you provide on so many issues. And to your point, our Jewish caucus is really excited. There are a really great wave of Democratic candidates running for the legislature this year that are diverse Jews, Jews of color, Jews who are LGBTQ. And so we are very, very excited to see some of them as they work through their campaigns. It's now an honor to reintroduce Betty Yee. She's really someone who needs no introduction, but the incredible vice chair of the California Democratic Party. Great to see you, Vice Chair Yi. So I wanted to ask you, your weekly posts on Facebook are well known and well received. I am among many people around the state who enjoys reading them. And, I saw that last week you spoke about Passover. And I saw that you quoted a former rabbi of mine in a beautiful, beautiful post. And you talked about not waiting for miracles to happen and instead creating them. And so can you share a little bit more about that for our audience here?
Sure. Thank you, Assemblymember Gabriel. And just really an honor to be here with my fellow panelists and really celebrating this Festival of Freedom. It's I reflect back on this past 2+ years that we've all experienced, and certainly the hardship, the pain, the illnesses, the deaths. And as I think about this time, especially, but really any time, I think when we all feel like the tough road is ahead of us, we're seeking miracles. And I think for most people, just even the concept of a miracle would suggest that there's some sort of divine intervention that needs to happen. And I can say that one of the blessings that I think we have all felt during this time is that we've seen miracles happen every single day. And certainly your leadership with the caucus and the response by the legislature during this time of our governor, of people in general in terms of pulling together and what we needed to do to just take care of each other. I did quote the late Rabbi Harold Schulweis in my writings this past weekend, because he reminded us that the Hebrew word for miracle means sign. And so he speaks about miracles as something having that has really the ability to make an important difference in our lives, in our community, and that the miracle as a sign is not something really extraordinary that defies logic or nature. It is really referring to events and experiences that make us take notice of the extraordinary in the ordinary, the wonder in the everyday, and the marvel in the routine. And I love that quote because we saw so much of that exhibited during these past two+ years. As I think about, just for each of us, when we are feeling in despair, when we're feeling just that we may not have all that we need to make a difference, when we are feeling indifferent. I think those are things that set us back from being able to become free and have the ability to uplift others. And so when I talk about creating miracles, they're very simple acts. And I think we've all seen them every day. And so there's a great quote that I always like to say, and that is, if you want a miracle, be a miracle. And so it is all of the things that we did during this pandemic, checking in on our neighbors, preparing food for, those who really were finding themselves out of, being able to earn a livelihood, taking care of our children at home when they weren't able to be in school to learn in the classroom. I mean, just on and on and on. But this is really I think, the specialness and the awesomeness of this festival was that we know about the miracles with the story of the Exodus. And as we bring that forward and as we look at just how that's exhibited today, it gives us great hope, but it also fuels the work that we continue to do as activists, because our work is truly grounded in the ability to uplift all communities and to be sure that it is grounded in the core of attaining true equity and justice.
Just beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Betty. And it reminds me of a great quote by David Ben-Gurion, who said, anyone who does not believe in miracles is not a realist. So we know that miracles are with us and that we can be part of creating them. You quoted Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory, who was the rabbi at my synagogue, Valley Beth Shalom in Encino. I have a bias that all roads eventually lead to the San Fernando Valley, and that brings us to our next panelist, which is Serena Oberstein. Many of you know her because she is a Democratic Party delegate, Democratic Party activist, very active in our state Democratic Party and the LA County Democratic Party. She is well known in Los Angeles, where she has been a nonprofit leader, a civic leader, the president of the LA City Ethics Commission, and now has taken her talents to Jewish World Watch, which is a nonprofit headquartered in the San Fernando Valley, where she's the executive director. And they work to bring hope and help and healing to survivors of mass atrocities around the globe. And they seek to inspire people of all faiths and cultures and background to join the ongoing fight against genocide. So Serena, it is such a delight to see you. Welcome. And my question for you is, healing is a word we hear used often these days. And it's something that's happening, but it's not happening on the scale that's needed. So what insight can you share for how we as individuals can help there to be more healing in the world? Some of the problems we see feel so overwhelming, some of the problems that you tackle as the executive director of Jewish World Watch Team Around, but how can we be there, help create more healing in the world?
Thanks so much, Assembly Member, and thank you to the California Democratic Party for pulling this event together. I'm going to build on what Controller Yee said. Look, I think it's easy to feel like there are so many issues to tackle that we don't know where to start. And so we're like, well, maybe I shouldn't do anything. But I would assert that whether you have 1 minute or 1 hour a day, that you can actually make an impact. So you need to find the issue that lights a fire in your belly, sign a petition, call your elected official, or simply listen to the story of a person who's disenfranchised, someone whose family is enduring targeted persecution, and acknowledge that you hear them, that you see them. Our co-founder, as both of you have talked about, Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory said, you can choose, you can act, and you can transform the world.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you so much, Serena. It is now my great honor to introduce a colleague and a friend of mine, Senator Josh Becker. He is someone who has been an innovator who's worked on fighting climate change and been a community activist and work on social justice issues, was elected to the state Senate in November 2020 and represents the residents of California's 13th Senate District, which is most of San Mateo County and the northern part of Santa Clara County. I had the opportunity to be with Senator Becker earlier today. Our Jewish caucus had our monthly caucus meeting in the Capitol. It's where we got together over some matzah and lox. So don't worry, there was matzah eaten in the state Capitol today, and talked about what we want our social justice agenda to be for this year, because every year as a caucus, we have what we call our Tikkun Olam priority bill package. And as for those of you who know, Tikkun Olam is the Jewish notion of repairing the world, of uplifting vulnerable communities. And every year, we as a caucus develop a package of bills that are not about our community or specifically about our community. They're about bringing equity and justice and healing to to all Californians, and particularly our most vulnerable communities. So one of the things we talked about today was an amazing bill that Senator Becker has introduced to eliminate all telecommunications fees in California prisons and jails for incarcerated individuals and their families. So Senator, I'm hoping you can tell everyone gathered here today a little bit about that bill, and tell us what inspired you to author that legislation.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you for all the wonderful words that we've heard so far. And I have to say, this is unlike any Seder that I've been part of. It actually runs on time. So very unlike my family Seders. But thank you. This bill, let's just speak for a moment about it, and I'll tell a little of the motivation. I think it speaks to a core Tikkun Olam value around social justice. And a key goal of social justice reform has been promoting successful re-entry of people back into our society and to reduce recidivism for those currently incarcerated. And thus promoting communication and family connection is not only a basic moral thing to do and a moral right, but it's also an essential strategy to keep incarcerated individuals integrated with their support systems and their communities. Everybody knows, I was talking to our Attorney General about this very same thing. And make sure they're not cut off from the loved ones in their community. And right now, phone and communication fees are a hefty burden on low-income families and are counterproductive to successful reintegration. So this is something I sort of heard about, and I know there's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry created around prison phone calling, and it just didn't seem right. And I got connected with people and learned that we can address this, and that's why we're pursuing it now.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Senator. Thank you so much. And we're so proud to have you up here and so excited to have you as a member of the caucus. And even though you've only been in the legislature for a short period of time, you've already certainly made an impact and made a splash. So it's such a wonderful thing to have you. So I want to open it up now to some conversation for folks. And I wanted to start with a conversation, just to throw it out there. It was very, very meaningful to me that the California Democratic Party decided to organize this event. And I want to, extend my thanks to India Thomas and Vincent Jones and Yvette Martinez and Ben and everyone who's involved in organizing this. It really made a difference. And I know that the members of our caucus felt so touched when the party reached out about organizing this. But I wanted to ask, to some of our panelists, what does it mean to you personally that CADEM has programming like this, that is about our Jewish community, that recognizes our Jewish community, that shows us that we are seen and valued and important? So Serena, why don't you go ahead and let us know what that means to you?
Sure. Well, as all of us know, Moses is often referred to as the first organizer. And so it's fitting that the party that values workers' rights and civil rights and human rights through not only policy, but also action should put together an event like this. Human rights shouldn't be a political issue, but sometimes it is. And one of the most important teachings that we learn during Passover is that every person must act as though they personally went from enslavement, that no one is free until all of us are free. And so the California Democratic Party hosting an event like this is actually empowering each of us here and across the state to help us fulfill the obligation to continue to work together towards the liberation of all people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Serena. I want to ask you a question, Vice Chair Yee. Why is it important to you and the fellow CADEM officers to change the culture of the party? Why is that's something important? And how do you see that impacting our ability to win elections and more importantly, to advance our progressive and democratic agenda?
Sure. No, thank you for the question, Assembly Member. It is critical that we look at changing the culture of the party at its very most basic level. To be sure that we have the ability to represent all Democrats in the state and more and beyond, but that this is a home really where we can welcome the lived experiences of so many of our diverse communities. And so when I look at this culture change work, it really is about what you and Serena just set out to define, and that is that each of us is heard and each of us is seen. And what does that mean? That means that we come from just lineages of rich history. It means that we have all had backgrounds where we've had our share of repression and our own Exodus stories that we can share. It means that we come together to do this meaningful work of how we are uplifting communities together. And we can only do that when there is a cultural change that is defined by making this a party that is anti-racist, that is free of judgment, that is hopefully promoting understanding and deeper understanding of our diverse communities. And I will also say from a larger perspective, we're looking at probably a time in our history where there's such political polarization. And I think that's a danger because as we're becoming much more rich in our diversity here in California, something we celebrate as a party, something we celebrate as a state, as a strength and not a threat, we have every force coming at us to try to continue to divide us. And I think part of this culture change is really to understand, the bonds that we have, through our, that are interwoven by our history, by our experiences, and more importantly, by the work that we need to do together to be sure that, no community is going to be, just be a victim and be the target of being held back and not having the opportunities that so many of us here have enjoyed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And we are I will say on behalf of the members of the caucus, we're so grateful for your leadership and that of the other officers and everything you're trying to do to strengthen our party. And I will just add on a personal note, I think I was probably, at bar mitzvah age before I realized that being Jewish and being a Democrat were separate things. I mean, they were so deeply intertwined in my family. And, we would get together for Shabbat dinner or around the Seder table for Passover. And we were talking about justice, social justice, about economic justice, about activism, about our obligation to go out there and be allies and work to fight against racism and poverty and inequity. And I think that the Democratic Party, I've always believed, is the natural home of the American Jewish community. Yeah. And it is so meaningful to us to see ourselves as a part of this party and to be able to link arms with other communities, with other diverse communities from across the state, and to say, we share a common struggle and we're going to work together to advance our democratic values. So we're so grateful for your leadership on that.
No, and thank you. And I know the officers are all of one voice as relates to this culture change. One thing I did want to share, Assembly Member, if I could, just from a personal experience. When as the API community is feeling the rise in anti-API hate, I will say that one of the developments, and I think a lesson learned from so many of our other communities who stood in allyship with us, who stand in allyship with us, is that this has been such a big part of your history. And for many AAPI communities, this is a new concept. And so to actually see that as we were rallying on the streets, and to be sure that we were speaking out against what was happening to our community members, that for the first time, and I think this is a beautiful development, we are seeing generations of AAPI families, just really expressing, together this commitment to really rule out and eradicate hate and discrimination. So I think these lessons learned by just having the ability to be neighbors with you, to just work alongside you, to understand that this has been a part of the history of so many other peoples, has been so instructive to our own community.
It's beautiful. We've had so much of that in the legislature as well, where the leadership of the API caucus has been so supportive of the Jewish caucus and vice versa. And we have worked together on hate crimes legislation and support each other, and as our various communities and other communities, the LGBTQ community, the Black community, and others have had to endure immigrant communities, racism and discrimination. So, again, I think we're stronger and so much better off when we are working together. So speaking of fighting racism and API hate and anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism, Ty, you have been at the forefront of a lot of that in the Bay Area. You have been outspoken and bold and unabashed in pushing back against hate of all forms. And you've also done that really as a leader in the Jewish community to push back against the fight against the rise in anti-Semitism, which so many in our community have been feeling. And I know that we felt that personally in my family and in our community. So tell us a little bit about that work and how it's going.
Absolutely. And to Controller Yi, when we saw this scapegoating of the American Asian Pacific Islander community, we immediately took out a full-page ad in Singtao Daily, and we got every major Jewish organization across the Bay Area to sign on to that because we felt that in our gut. We know how it feels to be scapegoated. And to your point, Assembly Member, the same thing happened to us 9 months later. There was a Gaza escalation, and Jews were scapegoated for the actions of a foreign government that they may or may not have a connection to, may or may not agree with. But we were stopped on the street. We were stopped in our schools. We were stopped on social media to say, you can't join us. You can't join our club. You can't sit with us unless you disavow the Jewish state. And that parallel rise in hate is so interconnected to the experiences of the Asian Pacific Islander community and other communities right now. And so we were inspired by the uprising that's happened over the past couple of years of the Stop API Hate movement. And we wanted to bring some of that discussion to the Jewish community. There's a lot of folks in our public education system that know about the Holocaust. The Holocaust is 5 years of our experience. And so whether we're talking about 21st century anti-Semitism, whether it relates to the Jewish state or whether it relates to extremism on the far left or far right, we need to make sure that this is a part of our education system through ethnic studies for the Jewish American experience, and to make sure people understand Jewish identity. We're not just a white religious minority in this country. And if we're put in that box, we're denied important conversations that we need to have about how our community should be included in government, in politics, in media, and in our education system. So that's what we're trying to pursue, and to connect the dots to the similar concerns that our neighbors in minority communities are experiencing.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tyler. So I now want to turn over to Senator Becker. Josh, you went through the craziness of the campaign to get to the legislature. You earned that opportunity to represent 1 million people. And you know what those campaigns are like, and you know that sometimes in a campaign you can get attacked. But what I think we've seen here that has been very troubling to me, and I know to you and members of the Jewish caucus, is that some Jewish candidates have been on the receiving end of anti-Semitic attacks, right? And we saw this, for example, with Josh Lowenthal, who's now running again for assembly. When he was running last time, there was anti-Semitic flyers that his Republican opponent sent out. And that was a consultant with a history of doing that, where they played you know, up anti-Semitic tropes as a campaign strategy. So what do you attribute that to? And, you know, as someone who's been a leader on elections issues and protecting the right to vote and strengthening our democracy, what do you think the party can do to fight it?
Well, thank you. And it's not just in campaigns. We've seen one of our colleagues in the caucus, you know, be attacked also by an interest group that, you know, distorted some of his facial features and such. And so we've seen that as well. And so number one is we have to be vigilant on it. Number two, we have to make it clear that it's not going to be tolerated. And this is where the allies that we were just talking about, the allies with the API community, the allies that TIE has, the alliances that TIE has been building, you know, will really serve us well. But, you know, and then the party itself, for the party itself to speak up, and as I believe it has this year in the convention process of this past year, for the party to be clear that's not going to be tolerated. Some of the linkages that you mentioned earlier, and disavowing a foreign government, you know, that's not going to be tolerated. So I think just having that very clear messaging, both from our allies and from the party, is really critical.
Great, thank you so much. So speaking of the party and elections, I want to go back to you, Madam Controller. So, you know, we have a number of candidates for different offices this year. California Democratic Party endorsed candidates. And so what is the party doing to help those Jewish Democrats win their elections? And what can you tell us about our work to organize Jewish voters and you know, make sure we get the vote out for all of our CADEM endorsed candidates?
Yeah, thank you. We are already hard at work in really engaging our voters. And, you know, one of the things about the party that we have recognized for a very long time is that organizing doesn't just happen months ahead of an election. You know, it really needs to be done year round. And as we now have our endorsed candidates, we have our activists are already in gear. They are canvassing, they are registering people to vote, but more importantly, with our endorsed candidates, really being able to talk about the importance of electing people who are going to understand the needs of their communities. And so we do go to where the voters are. And I think that's part of our Forever Organizing campaign, is to be sure that we are staffed up and have the ability to cover all reaches of the state. To the extent that we do have endorsed candidates in that area, we will be featuring them. We will be speaking to every registered voter in that area. And but also something that Senator Becker referred to, as did you, Assembly Member, and that is, you know, part of why I think Forever Organizing is so important is because there's consistent engagement, which means that we are building trust over time with information, and certainly with information about our qualified endorsed candidates as well. And so this is about establishing a relationship with our voters. It's about establishing trust. It's also about calling out when we are seeing misinformation and disinformation. And we have mechanisms within the party for how we are combating that with many volunteers. We had hundreds of volunteers really at the ready, attorneys, you know, other volunteers who were just calling out misinformation just on the act of voting itself. And so we are geared up. We are filling out the rest of our organizing team as we speak. And you can count on us being on the ground now until Election Day to be sure that we are making sure all of our voters understand who our endorsed candidates are, and particularly that we turn out the Jewish vote as well.
Well, I appreciate that. And I look forward. I hope I get a chance to walk some precincts with you and knock some doors with you for some of our candidates, and same with all of the activists here. You know, we have so much work to do, whether it comes to defending, you know, our very slim majorities in Washington, or making sure that we're, you know, protecting our majorities in the state Senate or local Democrats. We have a lot of work to do, and our democracy is at stake. So I hope that everyone who's here celebrating us tonight will be part of that effort, because it is an all hands on deck effort. I want to take a step back and maybe go zoom out a little bit. Let's go a little bit more global. And for that, we'll call in our expert, Serena. You know, we talked about this a little bit, and Rabbi Jacobs and Rabbi Eager, you know, spoke of it so beautifully, which is about our refugee crisis. And, you know, one of the things that I'm so proud of California is that we welcome refugees, we welcome immigrants. We are proud to have undocumented folks as part of our community. We stand up for them and embrace them. But we have these terrible conflicts all over the world that are creating refugees, and we have a refugee crisis. And so, what types of challenges are you seeing in communities that we should be aware of, and how can we best support and welcome our refugee brothers and sisters into California?
Thanks, Assembly Member. I think it was mentioned at the beginning of the Seder that there are more refugees in this moment than any other time in history. And I'll say that for the 20 years prior to me starting this job, I worked domestically for civil rights for all people. And over the last 2 years, what I've observed is that sometimes it can feel easier for people to have compassion for issues when they're farther away. But as the Torah tells us, each of us knows the soul of the stranger or the refugee, because we were once strangers in a strange land. And while the Jewish community wandered in the desert for 40 years, we were offered manna from the sky, sustenance, daily. We were taken care of daily by the universe. And as we see rampant food insecurity and access to resources like shelter and education, a rise in gender-based violence against those most vulnerable, we have to ask ourselves what our obligation is to nourish and sustain refugees. And I would submit that through providing resources to grow food in the most arid desert climates or here at home, amplifying the voices of the unheard, for fighting for transitional justice, both far and away and on US shores, that we have to continue to support our sisters and brothers who are forced to wander. We have to ensure that they feel welcome here, that they feel safe, included, that they have access to education and healthcare, so that they can assimilate and create a home, which is what each of us want, because again, their story is our story.
Beautiful, Serena, and I will say, just in transitioning to our next question, I think that so much of the work that I do in public service is so deeply informed by my Jewish values, and when I'm fighting for justice, whether it's fighting against gun violence or fighting for the undocumented community or fighting against racism or poverty or inequality, to me that feels like a fundamentally Jewish act, and it feels like I'm doing so in the best spirit of our tradition. And some of before I came to the legislature, I sued the Trump administration twice on behalf of DACA recipients. And it was among the most Jewish things I have ever done. It felt like that is something that is so deeply connected to who we are and what we're all about. And I keep in my office in Sacramento 2 quotes from Pirkei Avot to remind me of some of our Jewish wisdom and how it informs the policy work that we want to do with other communities too, and with our Democratic Party to advance a more equitable and just society. So it is something that has deeply informed my values. But I'm curious, I want to hear a little bit about you, Senator Becker. This event is titled Passover as a Call to Justice. We've been talking about the work that the wonderful people on this panel do to advance justice each and every single day. And I'm just curious, we ate matzah and lox together in the state capitol. So that counts for something. But how do you see your Jewish values being connected to your work? And what can you tell me about it? You do so much great work on so many types of important public policy issues. Where do your Jewish values fit into that?
Well, thank you, Joseph. Again, thank you for your leadership of the caucus. You're doing an incredible job. I think you should be leader for life, but we'll have to discuss that. And I wish I had a picture of the matzah and lox. If you have one, let me send it over to us. Yeah, I was thinking as Serena was speaking that thinking about my grandparents who were refugees to this country. My grandfather came when he was 14. For example, he worked in his brother's store, and then his own corner deli where my mom was raised. And so as Serena was speaking, I was just thinking about my own family history and being refugees, being immigrants to this country. And we were at a Seder when I got back, went to Philadelphia, then came back, and it was someone who had, come from Ukraine when she was a small child, and about her father's experience in this country. So I think, as you say, it's just inherent. It's so a part of our identities, the social justice lens and work that I do, whether it be criminal justice reform, whether it be on education, is just informed by where we grew up, the ethos and the values that continue to motivate us every day.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that, Josh. I want to do one more question, and then I think we're going to flip it back over to Ben. And I want to go back to you for a minute, Ty, if that's okay. You know, our Jewish tradition is full of this tension between the obligation that we have to stand up for ourselves and to protect ourselves and to assert ourselves and to protect our community, and also the obligation we have to other communities, right? And to fight for justice and dignity for everybody. And we see that, you know, really, if you look in the teachings of our tradition, we are obligated to fight for others. And so I wanted to know, you know, as someone who's doing a lot of intersectional work, but who also works for a Jewish organization, you are the CEO of the JCRC. How do you balance those, and how have you grappled with that in your career? And how is there any insight you can share with us as somebody who's trying to do both of those things at the same time?
So it's a great question, and one that I struggle with. I guess, you know, struggling with God is part of our tradition. So I actually think that those two things are one and the same. You know, JCRC's tagline is a just society and a secure Jewish future. I don't think we can have a secure Jewish future without a just society. And I think that, you know, we know well that when our community is attacked, it's a canary in a coal mine for other communities and vice versa. We can't have a secure future independently of the broader issues facing our democracy. We have existential threats facing our democracy, which of course this party is incredibly focused on. But we also can't have a just society if Jews are not a part of that story. So when we stand up for communities of color, when we stand up for LGBTQ rights, we also require our neighbors to stand up for Jews. So they are inherently one and the same, and there is no separation between those two pillars of the work that we are all committed to doing. And I just want to close with this and say, Passover is about nourishment. And everyone on this call that's Jewish knows we eat some really weird foods on this holiday, but it's also about spiritual nourishment. It's about, you know, when we talk about affliction, when we talk about all these wrongs in the world, Passover is about coming together to sort of rebuild that spiritual strength that we need to continue this good fight. And I'm grateful for you and your leadership, Assembly Member, for giving us some of that spiritual nourishment. And my thanks to the party and Vincent Jones, my good friend, for organizing this event.
Thank you, Ty. You stole my closing. I was going to thank all of you for the spiritual nourishment. It is always nourishment to be with Rabbi Jacobs and Rabbi Eager, to be in the presence of our extraordinary State Controller and Vice Chair Betty Yee, and to be with activists like you and Serena and my colleague Senator Becker. That is inspiring, and I am filled with some renewed optimism to rededicate myself to the work that we all are committed to as Democrats here in the state of California. I think we can be honest about the fact that it's been an exhausting and really difficult couple of years. It's been really, really hard. And we see that, as always, unfortunately, it has disproportionately impacted our low-income communities and our communities of color, but everybody, I think, is feeling the times that we're in, and whether it's the COVID pandemic, this war that we're seeing in Ukraine, the incredible division that Betty Yee talked about in our society. It's been a hard 2 years, and we're exhausted. And so to have an opportunity to sit down, to be just in the presence of people who get up every day and fight to make our society stronger and better, people like you, Ty, and you, Serena, who are out there mobilizing the nonprofit sector, and then also to be with our incredible activists who are the heart and soul of this party. Seeing some of the names of who's on this Zoom, it is some of the best advocates that we have in the state of California, the people who make the phone calls and walk the precincts and give $5 a month and do all of the things that are needed to do to bend the arc of justice. So my soul is feeling certainly nourished after spending some time with all of you. I do have to give a special shout out as a point of personal privilege. I saw my aunt, Ann Katzberg, who's a CADEM delegate and former union president, is on. So Ann, I love you, and it's good to see you. And I also want to thank our amazing ASL interpreters, Hilda and Cheryl. I don't know how you guys do it, but you guys are awesome. So thank you. Thank you again to the party leadership. I will tell you, our caucus feels seen, we feel heard, we feel loved, and we are so proud to be allies with the California Democratic Party and the great work that you do. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ben Seinfeld.
All right, great. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the CADEM Celebrates Passover as a Call to Social Justice A special thanks to our speakers, Vice Chair Betty Yee, Assembly Member Jesse Gabriel, Senator Josh Becker, Tyler Gregory, Serena Oberstein, Rabbi Denise Ager, and Rabbi Stephen Jacobs. Additionally, thank you to those that made sure this event was accessible to everyone tonight, interpreters Cheryl Cooper and Hilda Colandres, Debbie Goodfriend for providing CART translations, and Technical Director James Seelman. And finally, a special thanks to Vincent Jones and India Thomas in organizing this event. Please join us for our next CADEM Celebrates Eid, Tuesday, May 3rd from 6 to 7. The link to RSVP is in the chat. Thank you.